good afternoon, everyone. Welcome along. So I'm going to talk a little bit more from the perspective of how, as coaches, we can really try and work as effectively with parents as possible. So as we know, parents are a really foundational part of youth sport. And I'll just say a caveat before we go any further. Both Camilla and I, when we're talking about parents, we might also include anyone really with a caring responsibility for a child who's involved in the youth sport clubs and organisations that we're part of. So that might also be a grandparent or a carer. So consider that term very broadly. But they are certainly an important part of our role. And finding ways to build relationships with parents and families might be a part of your role that you really relish and that as a coach you believe is important, or it's one that causes you a little bit of stress and is one that perhaps you wish you didn't really have to manage. It might also be in your coaching context that you have lots of expectations for you to spend time and resources to work with parents, or it might be that actually it's something that you find it difficult to prioritize depending on the type of organization that you're working in. And I want to start by saying that any of those experiences along that spectrum are completely valid, and regardless of where you sit on those continuums, I'm hopefully going to share with you some ideas for how you can reflect on your current engagement with the parents that you work with. So if you have a pen and paper there's a small task just to consider to start with that will hopefully help you to then reflect upon your current engagement. So just think about what would be one thing that you would like to achieve as a coach in relation to working with the parents of the children that you are involved in coaching. And so it's worth noting that when we think about parents in sport, quite often we hear examples of the extremes, maybe parents who are being very aggressive in their behaviours and are not necessarily helping the coaching process, through to parents of proteges who everyone wants to know what it is that they've done for their child to be so successful at such an early age. And in reality, there's a lot of different types of coach-parent relationships. So see what you might resonate with on this slide here. So there has been some work around identifying the different sort of parent types that we might encounter as coaches. And although these can sometimes be a little bit of a stereotype, it might be something that you have seen or experienced in your coaching. And broadly, the parent types often kind of fall into good parents and problem parents. And that's where the typology can sometimes be a little bit unhelpful. However, it may be something that you recognize from your experience. And in amongst the different parents that we work with, there is a huge variety, not just positive and negative or good and problem parents. There's a huge variety of coach relationships that we might encounter. Broadly speaking, that might be that as a coach, we can develop a collaborative relationship with parents in sport, where we might have shared goals and a mutual respect for each other's expertise. Alternatively, we can have a type of relationship that is more focused on working primarily with the children that we coach and our young athletes, where the parent is perhaps more in the background. They're a little more distant. They're maybe kept at arm's length to a certain extent, and the coach-athlete relationship is the primary area of interest. And thirdly, there has been research suggesting that there is a contractual type of coach-parent relationship as well, where the parents are our customers, and as a consequence, as a coach, we may feel obliged to help to meet parents' needs because of the kind of service provider role that we are fulfilling as a coach. So I hope in this slide you can see that there is a real variety of the way that we might interact with parents, and hopefully this helps to emphasize the point around trying not to see parents as homogenous. And often it's easy to say the parents are doing this, all parents are behaving like this, but there's a real variety in the types of relationships that we may have already and that we might seek to develop. So think about these coach-parent relationships. Are there ones here that jump out to you as things that you identify with, or ones that you might want to try to build with the appropriate time and resources? These different relationships will also vary in terms of the expectations that both coaches and parents have of each other. Our different views on expertise and who perhaps has control or responsibility for making decisions around training, deciding what's best for the development of our children in sport. We may have different types of communication in terms of how frequent that communication is, how informal or formal, how open and honest we feel that we can be with coach parents. They'll also vary in terms of the amount of trust that we may have when working with parents, and equally parents working with us as coaches. And there's some different ways of thinking about trust, which has been identified in some of the research, is that there may be different levels of technical trust in terms of parents trusting coaches with our knowledge of our sport and how to develop athletes. And there may also be interpersonal trust, which is more focused on understanding how, as coaches, we're trusted to build positive relationships with the children and the families of the children that we coach. And then all of the other four, I guess, really underpin how we might deal with any conflict within interactions we have with parents. So across many different sporting contexts from different countries, there has been an indication that on the whole, coaches report that working with parents is generally positive, and that there can be a huge range of benefits that Camilla is also going to talk about shortly, that we can gain from having these relationships. However, even in really positive parent relationships, it can be expected that at some point through a child's journey in sport, we may find some conflicts. So how we manage and resolve those will differ depending on the type of relationship that we have with that parent. So thinking about our goal for what we'd like to do or what we'd like to achieve with working with parents, this model, I think, is really useful for helping us reflect on the decisions that we might make. So this is adapted from Abraham's coach decision-making model, might be familiar to some of you. And we're going to have a look at that today in terms of what it might mean for how we can try and enhance the relationships that we have with the parents that we work with. So firstly, it's worth considering who are the parents of the children that you coach. Firstly, does your goal that you wrote down relate to all of the parents, most of them, or maybe is it some parents that actually there's something there you would like to change or improve? And whether or not it is all or some of those parents, do you know those parents well enough to judge how receptive they might be to the goal that you want to change? And do you think that parents might respond differently to your intended goal? So there are many things that might be different amongst parents that, if we understood, might help us to have more positive, mutually beneficial interactions. What can parents do to support children in youth sport? So it's important that we have a clear idea about how we think parents can benefit children in sport. And this may in particular be a reflection of our own beliefs developed from our own experiences of working with parents over time, maybe our own parenting, or even how we were parented ourselves. And thirdly, it's worth reflecting on the ways that we can try and work effectively with parents too. So looking at your goal, what is maybe stopping this from being achieved? Or if you have tried it before, did it work? Did it not work, and why? What resources do you have that might help you to be able to achieve your goal? And all these things work together. Around the outside, the model recognises that when we're working with a parent in sport, it's not in a social vacuum, it is within a particular club or organisational context. So understanding how the environment in which we work maybe enables certain types of interactions with parents or maybe constrains it is really important, as is reflecting on our own beliefs, values and behaviours that we hold as coaches in relation to working with parents. So if you look at your goal, is it framed more positively? Are there things that you want parents to do more? Or is it maybe framed negatively? There's things that you would like parents to do less of or to even stop doing. Is it a goal that's more directed around helping you as a coach? Or is it more directed around the parent helping the child that you coach? All of these things might be influenced by our own beliefs about what parents can do and why. And finally, to what extent have you as a coach in the past planned time to focus on your interaction with parents and reviewed how it is going? Maybe making some time to consider what we want to achieve with working with parents and how we can maybe do it differently can be useful. So to unpick these in a little bit more detail, understanding our who. So who are the parents that we work with? Parents are going to vary based on a number of things, and I've put some in the box on the slide here. But maybe the really key one there is expectations. Understanding what expectations a parent has before they come into your sporting context, and maybe how those change over time. So potentially thinking about what questions do you ask parents to kind of understand what their expectations are for their child, what their expectations are of you as a coach, can help you to understand your parents a little better. Equally, is there a point where you review that? Do you have opportunities year on year, maybe mid-season, where you can have an open and honest conversation with parents about what their expectations are and how they might have changed? If we understand the needs of parents, potentially we might be able to adapt our communication and adapt our interactions to try and meet those needs for the benefit of everybody. So when we think about what parents can do to support children in youth sport, as I said, this might be something that is based on your personal experiences. And there are lots of ways that we know from research that parents can help children in youth sport. They are crucial potentially to enhancing children's experiences and making it a really positive environment and helping children to stay in sport and have a lifelong love for sport as long as possible. There are also behaviours that parents can do to really try and foster children's psychosocial development, both in the moment and really working on some of those competencies that they can apply into other areas of their lives as well. Parents are important in helping children make it through really difficult transition points and helping them to progress through their career if that's what they wish to do so. And as Sergio said right at the beginning, parents have this really special knowledge and expertise that they know their child best, and being able to share not just how that child is responding in a sport environment, but what else is going on in their lives, and other kind of information about that child may be helpful for us to improve what we're doing as coaches as well. So I know Camilla's going to talk about more specific things that parents can do to bring about positive outcomes, but I think it's worth us understanding as coaches what it is that we would like parents to do so we can help to think about our own engagement. And finally, the how. So with this in mind, if we know what type of relationship we want to build, and we think we understand our parents and we know what we'd like them to do, what strategies can work to help enhance that engagement with parents? So I'm going to focus on two areas, both communication and trust, as I think these are foundational to being able to understand each other's expectations and manage and resolve conflicts should and if they arise. So thinking about enhancing communication, we need to think about the frequency of how often we are making opportunities to both share information with parents and have an opportunity for discussion in more of a two-way dialogue as well. And I think it's easy to say, well, we just need to talk to parents more often. But the caveat there is that, what is realistic? So depending on the coaching context in which you're working, you may have more or less time and resources to be able to talk more frequently with parents. Or there might be ways that you have to be a little bit more selective on how you do that so that you're making the most of your time and resources too. Planning the content of your communication is really key as well. Perhaps there are obvious ways that we communicate with parents in terms of logistics and arrangements for competitions and things like that. But how are we sharing feedback with parents about how their child is doing? How are we asking for parents to share with us how they think their child is finding being in that sport environment? Are we asking parents how they're finding being in the sporting environment? As parents certainly can also experience transitions and different journeys as they support their child through sport. And finally, thinking about the processes of how we enhance that communication is important too. So are we going to focus on a strategy that involves informal communication? So some examples from youth tennis include having parent laps where the coach makes the opportunity to go round the courts to make sure every parent has been spoken to in an informal way, or in football, being able to be accessible either at the beginning of the session for a bit, just have some general catch-up chats, or perhaps at the end. Or is it more formal types of communication where perhaps you're organising meetings, thinking about who's in those meetings and why we're holding them? So again, in elite youth football, there's an expectation that there's a number of parent and coach meetings held throughout a season. Thinking about how those meetings can play out can be a useful idea. Two other pieces of advice from research in terms of enhancing communication is to think about individualizing your approach where possible. So if we know that parents are not homogenous and have different needs, and maybe that you might have slightly different types of relationships with parents, perhaps you need to think about communicating slightly differently where we can. And also setting boundaries with the number of different types of communication there is available at the moment. So social media, text messaging, emails, etc. It can become very overwhelming if, as a coach, we are so open that those kind of requests and long emails, etc., are kind of reaching us all the time, and that may be difficult to manage too. So I think it's okay to have some clear boundaries with ways that you will communicate with parents and that parents can communicate with you as a coach as well. And building trust, I think, is also key. So as I said before, there's some evidence that there's different types of trust that as a coach we can try and build with parents and families. Technical trust being that to what extent parents believe in our expertise to develop children in our sport appropriately. And so ways in some sports that coaches have found to build that technical trust include having an open session where there is perhaps a training session happening that you are on the sideline as a coach with the parents for them to watch, where they can ask questions about what they're seeing, that if there is a particular pedagogical strategy that they're not familiar with, they can ask questions, or if they're just unsure about anything, you're there on the sideline to basically have a Q&A, but alongside the session as it's occurring. And equally, this is particularly helpful. There's some examples from rugby union where the sport was trying to use more of a problem-based learning approach. So that can look quite messy from the sideline as a coach. And we know that the learning is happening, but it may be unfamiliar to parents. So having a particular session that explained the rationale behind those decisions enabled the rugby coaches to get more buy-ins from the parents about what were happening on the pitch. And equally, there's been research that's recommended having more formal kind of pre-season meetings to set those boundaries, explain philosophies, talk about what the goals are for the season. And I think that's part of the communication approach that can work best, is that there are some formal opportunities for sharing our approaches and for answering questions, with some more informal ones to kind of check in on how people are doing throughout a year. And interpersonal trust, I've put there, kind of seeing parents as an asset is probably the best starting point for how you can try and get that buy-in from parents to trust us at an interpersonal level. And therefore trying to reflect on our own coaching behaviours and the extent to which we are behaving in ways that help parents to see that we value their knowledge and expertise. So back to our decision-making model and your goal. Have a look at it again. I hope what I've talked about for the last few minutes have given you some things to think about in terms of understanding your parents, what they can do and how you might be able to work with them. But importantly, remembering that it will be different depending on the context in terms of the resources that you have to be able to work with parents. It's very different in an individual sport to a team sport, for example. And also that it's important to reflect on our own beliefs that we have in relation to working with parents and how we may be able to adapt to try and build that trust and find ways of effective communication that hopefully leads to more positive outcomes for everybody. Thank you very much for listening. I think I'm handing over to Camilla now, who I know is going to talk a lot more about some of these real benefits that hopefully effective coach-parent relationships can help to facilitate even more.